Hi, I'm the Moonlit Page Turner, and this is my fourth quarter reads of 2024. So these are all of the books that I read in October, November, and December of 2024. This is coming to you a little bit late because I did finish my last book on December 31st, but it still counts. So just like the other videos, we're going to walk through book club reads. We're going to look at some nonfiction and fiction. For my book club reads, we kind of fall off a little bit. I'm in two book clubs. We're the Savvy Gaming Network's video game book club. We did read two books. We kind of combined November and December, and that ended up being Dragon's Age Tevinter Nights, which is a short story collection. It's all about Dragon Age and different characters. It's written by multiple authors. If you are into Dragon Age, I would recommend it. I don't know that much about Dragon Age, although I have played Origins, and we've read some Dragon Age stuff in the past. It's pretty well written for a collection of short stories. Some of them are way better than others, though, I will tell you. So it was a mixed bag, but in all, I kind of enjoyed reading the different stories about kind of the world of Dragon Age. You don't need to know a whole lot about Dragon Age to read them, but it is recommended as you do see some of these characters in some of the games and other materials. We also read Alien Isolation by Keith R.A. DeCandito. That was based on the game, although DeCandito does take a lot of liberties with our main character's history, which both Savvy and I did not enjoy. So I gave it 3 stars. It's probably more like 2.5. I think the writing of the game was good. I could have done without her backstory about her and her stepdad and all of that. I felt like that took you too much out of the action that was supposed to be happening in the game, and it was missing some of the aspects of the game, which were kind of the entertaining parts of the game. So I felt like if he had gone more into turning it actually into a novelization, it would have been more successful, but it was just okay. For the Read the World, I only finished one country. I was a little bit behind, but then I also decided to take a break in December because a lot of these books are really sad, and Bolivia turned out to be one of the saddest. So I read 2 books. I read Tree Girl by Ben Michaelson, and this is actually about Guatemalan genocide, and it's a middle grade book, but it's so, like, I ugly cried when I read this. It's a great book, and it's an important topic, but it is emotionally damaging, I would say. And then for my nonfiction for Bolivia, I read Let Me Speak, and this is by Domitila Barrios de Changara, and it's actually really written by Momima Vizer, who saw Domitila speak at the women's speeches in Mexico, and that inspired her, and then she spoke to her and corresponded and pulled other speeches from her. So it's not really written by Domitila, and you can kind of tell because it tries to be chronological, but it really is all over the place. Domitila lives a really hard life. She lives in extreme poverty. She is the wife of a miner, and she works with the Women's Council in the mining area that she's in, and so she tries to get miners' rights, and then there is genocide going on there as well, and she gets arrested, and she gets beat up in jail to the point that she loses her baby. So she lives a really difficult life. This was not an easy read. It's not written very well either. So I decided to take a little break in December because those were some really hard topics. And I'm going into Bosnia next one, and the books that I chose, I know that that's also going to be a hard topic, so you will see those in January. For my nonfiction reads of October, November, and December of 2024, some of them fit and some of them were all over the place, just like most of my nonfiction reads. I read The Well-Trained Wife by Tia Leving. That actually just came out, and so it was brand new read, which is kind of unusual for me. I don't usually read like books that just come out. She was on the documentary Shiny Happy People, and she talks about her life as a fundamental Christian. So her and her family moved to Florida. They become really involved in the church there. She ends up meeting a boy, and that is her take is that she's supposed to get married and have babies, and then he goes really extreme with his religion, and to the point where her life and her kids' lives are in danger. It is a very emotional book. She is a great writer. If you are into kind of the religions and especially coming out from religion, I would highly recommend it. I give it 4 stars. She actually escapes her fundamental religion by writing on blogs, and so she is a great writer. But her story is sad. But she does survive, and her kids are doing pretty good. So happy ending. Good Morning Monster is another book that I saw, and I was like, oh, that looks interesting. I really should stop reading these books. So Catherine Gildner is the author. She's a psychologist, and she chooses 5 of her patients to talk about. I have a background in psychology, and I feel like these books, I don't know why I keep reading them, but they seem to me like a lot of client privilege, breaking of that client privilege between psychologists and their patients. And so that is a different dynamic. And so she asked for permission, but at the same time, this is someone who's been helping you, and so you're not likely to say no. It does, though, talk about how important children's lives are and how damaging child abuse is to people. And so she is a psychoanalyst. She follows the theories of Freud, where your whole personality is based on your childhood, and the things that happen to these people in their childhood is pretty horrific again, and it greatly affects them as adults. We're talking about neglect, child abuse. We're talking about molestation and things like that. So hard topic. I didn't find it that great. I think I gave it 3, and that was kind of more of like a pity 3 because I felt really bad for these people, but at the same time, like, talk in generalities of your patients. Don't be specific on them. Although you're trying to help other people, this is someone's life, and they're really gifting and being honest and vulnerable with you. Do not write about them, please. The next one was Dinner for Vampires, and that's Bethany Joy at Lent. She is an actress. She's probably best known for One Tree Hill. She's done a bunch of holiday movies as well. She talks about her time in her religious cult, and so that is kind of the theme of religious cults that go through there. I was not impressed by this book. I felt like she was not really ready to write it. It felt very superficial to me. She talks a little bit about One Tree Hill, but so if you're interested in that aspect, I would not read it for that. But again, if you are interested in kind of escaping from religion and kind of what other people have done, I think it would be an interesting read for that. I don't feel like, again, that she is fully healed from this and is ready to talk about it. She gives them different names, although, like, she calls her husband Quiet Boy, but it's public record who her husband is, so I'm not sure why she does that. So I felt the writing, again, to be superficial. I know that she can write well. I've heard her speak on the Drama Queens podcast, and this book caused kind of a rift between some of the girls. Even though they don't publicly talk about it, you can kind of read between the lines. But it wasn't the best book for this to do that, so that makes me a little sad. I'm glad that she is healing from her experience, and I think she used this as a healing tool, but I just don't think that she was quite there yet. And the next book on my list is The Unschooling Handbook by Mary Griffin. I work in education, and so I like to hear about different types of education, and so I wanted to learn about unschooling because I've heard about it. This book, I checked out 2 books from the libraries about unschooling, and this book made me return the other one without even reading it. It made me so irritated. I would say half to 2/3 of the book is actually testimonial from parents. It's about 30 parents that give little snippets of information. There's no structure in unschooling, hence the title of unschooling. And so to try to learn how to do it is kind of just a free-for-all, and I really feel for these kids because although some kids will thrive, because that's the essence of kids, is that those who are self-motivated will learn on their own, and whether they have teachers or not. they'll teach themselves. But it's a very, very select few. And I think it's just setting kids up for failure. And so I didn't like the way that this book was written. Some of the testimonials of the parents made me really upset for these kids, that they're kind of pushing their own agenda on their kids. So I returned both books without even reading the second one. I probably should have DNF'd that book, but I did make it all the way through. The next one is, again, we're going to skip all the way around, Your Money, Your Life, and this is by Vicki Robin. She actually has updated a book. She wrote this similar book with someone else who had passed away, and so this was kind of looking at finances in a different way. So her and her partner wrote a book, I want to say in the late 70s, early 80s. They kind of talked about finances and kind of how to set yourself up with ways to be able to not have a job and retire early. Obviously, things have changed quite a bit since the late 70s, early 80s, so some of their advice is not quite there, so this is an updated version. But I did like the way that they talked about looking at purchases as time, because you put in time to make money for your paycheck. And so if you think about it like, oh, it took me 4 hours to earn this amount of money that I'm going to use to pay for this item that I may only enjoy for an hour. Like, is it worth it? So I thought that that was an interesting concept. Overall, though, I think it's a little outdated. We definitely have advanced quite a bit with computers and other technologies. So it wasn't it started interesting, and then I think it just was a little outdated. And then we have some history with Empress of the Nile, and this is by Lynn Olson. And Lynn Olson looks at some early female archaeologists, and in particular archaeologists that are Egyptologists, which is kind of rare. For those of you that know anything about Egyptology, or archaeology really, so the British really were like, we're the archaeologists, and they went in and they took things from other cultures, and they're still trying to get them back from their museums. But in particular, because of Napoleon found the Rosetta Stone, which allowed us to interpret the hieroglyphs. France has a big hold on Egyptology, and especially all the stuff in the Louvre. And even though the Rosetta Stone is not in the Louvre, but so this book was supposed to focus on Christiane de Roche-Nobecourt. And she is an Egyptologist. She actually helped save a lot of stuff from the Louvre during German occupation in the 1940s. But this book ended up being a bait and switch because it was supposed to be about her. She does talk about other earlier female archaeologists, which I found really interesting. We learned about Nobecourt's involvement with the resistance and saving items from Hitler. But then it really goes into Jackie Kennedy Onassis and her involvement in protecting monuments in Egypt from development. And there's one in particular that if you've seen the Death on the Nile movie, where there's the statues next to the water, that's the monument that they saved, both her and Kennedy. So it was supposed to be about one Egyptologist, and then it ended up being about Jackie Onassis, which was a weird bait and switch. And the last one for nonfiction was something I just got access to at December, and it looked like an interesting book, and it is Astrophysics for Those in a Hurry, and that's by Neil deGrasse Tyson. It is a very quick book. It's like 4 hours audiobook, I think, maximum, and it does require some basic science knowledge. So if you're like, oh, I don't know anything about science or gravity, black holes, things like that, you're going to get a little lost. So it was easier to read than some of the other entry to science by scientists. And Neil deGrasse Tyson narrates it, and he's got such a smooth voice, so I was kind of relaxed a little bit into reading it. I thought that things on dark matter, he talks about that gravity is involved, and so I found that to be interesting. But again, I think it really, really helps if you have a background of science. I took some science in college, and I've read some other science books to kind of keep on top of what's actually happening out there in the stars. But it was a good kind of refresher for me, and I found certain aspects interesting, and then some of them just went over my head. for my fiction reads of the fourth quarter, so October, November, December of 2024. I'm going to start with my last book that I read, which I really enjoyed, and that was Slewfoot, and that's by Brom. And Slewfoot takes place during the Puritan era. We have Abatha as our main character. She has been brought over to, I believe they're in West Virginia, and she's been brought over to be married. She's been there for 2 years. Her and her husband have an okay relationship. Her husband is very passive. She is very spirited, which does not fit well into Puritan life. And she has some struggles with her brother-in-law, and so that causes her to be in trouble because women are to be seen and not heard in this time period. Also, what's happening is that there is an ancient spirit. He is referred to as Father. The reason why they call him Slewfoot is that is kind of a reference to like a demon, which he's half goat, half man, so it fits. And he is there to save the spirits in the pawpaw tree, and so he is awakened, and him and Abatha have to kind of team up in order to survive, really. I felt like it was really well written. The book will make you mad about how these women are treated and how they treat each other. So I was ready at the end for them to get their justice. So it does have somewhat of a happier ending. I felt like the epilogue was not necessary. It is kind of a long book, but I thought it was really well written and I enjoyed it. Before that, another great book that I read was Clytemnestra, and that is by Constanza Casti. And that is a retelling of the Greek story of Clytemnestra, who she is the sister of Helen of Troy. She's also the wife of Agamemnon. She kills Agamemnon in the Orestean trilogy, and it was a good retelling that this Spartan woman has a really hard life, and she decides that now I am a badass, and so I'm going to live my life as I choose. I'm going to survive when I need to, and then she does end up killing Agamemnon. They don't tell you at the end what actually happens to her, which is in the Orestean trilogy. Actually ends up being the first main like court case, and where we get justice in courts and stuff like that. I give it 4 stars. I thought it was well written. I really like the characters. It does have some essay and things like that. So just be aware. Her husband and son are killed, as in mythology as well. There was a couple things. So I used to teach Greek mythology, and I know a lot about Greek history. And so Spartan has 2 kings. That was not in the book. And then, of course, we see what happens with Helen and Troy and things like that. So I thought in all it was a really great read. I think I just know too much about Greek life and history to have fully enjoyed it. We'll go from my favorite read to my least favorite read was Out of My Mind, and that's by Sharon N. Draper. It is a book about disabilities. The main character, her name is Melody, and she has cerebral palsy. She's in a wheelchair and she's nonverbal. This has been recently adapted into a Disney Plus series. This book made me so mad. Not necessarily for her, because she is treated poorly, and there is some, she gets some of the justice for, like, when she's treated poorly, like, good things do end up happening to her. I was so sure that Draper has no education experience based on the way that she wrote about education. And come to find out, she was a national award-winning teacher of the year, which blew my mind, because some of the stuff that she wrote about in education, I was like, ain't no way that this person has any educational experience. So I probably should have DNF'd to this book, but it's pretty short, and I think if it was a little bit longer, then I would have. She ends up being able to get, the reason why it's Out of My Mind is because she is able to get a computer where she's able to communicate verbally, and so we find out that she's actually very intelligent. She has a photographic memory. She joins a group at school that, like, not necessarily mathletes, but they do, like, trivia stuff. But there was a couple of things with that as well, where it was only for 5th and 6th graders, and yet some of these 5th graders, that was their second year taking it, so I was like, well, that's not congruous. And so I don't know, like, this book just really, really annoyed me. I like reading books about characters, especially main characters who have disabilities, because they're so not usually represented at all in books. So to give them the spotlight, I think is really great. Cerebral palsy is a whole spectrum of disabilities, though, and they only focus on this one. And the mom annoyed me. The thing that happens with her sister at the end was so unnecessary, and I was just like, why? Why are we doing this? So this book, it all just made me super angry, so I gave it 1 star. Lies of the Ajungo and Binti are 2 very, very short books. So Lies of the Ajungo is by Moses Osa Utami, and that is about 80 pages, and that deals with a society who is taken over by the Ajungo, and they end up taking their ears so they can't hear, and they're called the City of Lies, and so they don't have water, and they were supposed to be given water, so they have a little bit of water. So the main character has to go out to find water for his mom, and then he finds this whole world of what the Ajungo has done and who the Ajungo actually is. And it was very well written. I think there's more books in the series, so I'd be interested in reading more of that. Binti is another very, very short book. It was one of the big books, I think, of last year. 2023 is so last year, sorry, I'm a little bit behind. And that's by Nindi Okorafor. And it is a short science fiction book about a girl who ends up getting kind of like a scholarship to go to another planet. And she's the only person of her society that has done that. They're very secretive. And then her spaceship gets hijacked, and so she has to be the one to kind of set things right. And so it was interesting. I liked the Lies of Ajungo more than I did Binti, but Binti also has more books in the series. I don't know if I would continue that one, but it was interesting, and I think for a short novel, it was pretty good. Times Convert by Deborah Hawkins is part of the Discovery of Witches series. It tells about Marcus and Phoebe's story. So if you know about the Discovery of Witches, it was a television show, but before that it was a series of 3 novels, and it deals with witches, vampires, and demons, and it has a historical aspect to it. So Marcus is actually from the American Civil War, and we see his backstory and him turning into a vampire. In present time, he meets Phoebe, who is an art appraiser, and she is in the Discovery of Witches series, and so she decides, because they want to be together, that she's going to become a vampire, and it's also her story of her turning. And so this takes place after the Discovery of Witches series. So I really enjoyed this book. It is very much historical fiction, and it's a little bit much, so if you're not into historical fiction, I don't think you would like it. But if you like the series, I think this was a great read to kind of read about Marcus and Phoebe, and not just the 2 main characters. Our main character is still our narrator in the series, but I liked reading about Phoebe and Marcus. The other last 2, I got 2 more. We'll talk about The Butcher Game by Elena Urquhart, and that is one of the Morbid girls, and this is her 2nd book in the series, and we have them going to the Berkshires, and so it's a little bit of a change from New Orleans. This one was not as sciencey as the first one, and that's what I really liked about the Butcher and the Wren. So The Butcher Game, we get new characters and new settings, obviously more death, and poor Wren gets put through the ringer yet again. It is definitely set up for a 3rd book, so I would be interested to see that. I think this is more of like a filler book to introduce characters and some of the main events that happen. So I would be interested to read the 3rd one. I was not as happy with this one. Again, I wanted more like of a sciencey stuff about what she does for autopsies and things like that. I like the CSI stuff. But, I mean, it wasn't bad, but for me, it wasn't as great as The Butcher and the Wren. The last book I'm going to talk about, again, I should have also DNF'd. This was Front Desk, and this is by Kelly Yang. This book is one of the many banned books that are going around, and so I do like to read those, because some of it is ridiculous, why they're being banned. And I'm always like, why are we banning these books? This book is about a little Chinese girl's family's fight against discrimination, why they run a desk at a hotel. They're Chinese. the young girl at the front desk. She kind of runs the front desk because her family is doing everything else in this hotel. They're getting screwed over by the owner. They are put in some really hard situations. They put this young girl at the front desk and tell her, don't let bad people in, but they don't tell her who's the bad people. So this drunk guy ends up coming in, and one of the regulars has to kind of rescue this little girl. And the fact that her parents really aren't there for her because they're constantly working was a little upsetting for me. I know I grew up with friends of parents of immigrants, and I know how hard they work, and I know how much they expect of their children. But at the same time, I would hope that by the end that there would be a better resolution. The way that her mom treats her is pretty harsh and does affect her. And she tells her that she should be good at math and not writing and reading, which is what the little girl wants. Because the mom's not good at reading because she is an immigrant and English is not her first language and she struggles with it. So there was a lot of really adult stuff in this book, so I could see maybe why it would be banned for younger audiences. They talk about loan sharks, and again, this guy was coming in to attack this little girl, so it was, I did not enjoy this book. There is more in the series, so I will not be reading more of Kelly Yang's. I felt like there was too many issues that were pushed together for the age range of this book. I felt like if you just talked about, choose one to talk about. If you're going to talk about discrimination, then just focus on that. And especially for a book for kids. So there were some aspects that I did like, but I just felt like it was so much thrown into one that it was not really successful. And it was just kind of too much going on. All right. And those are my fourth quarter reads for 2024. I will have a best and worst, so stay tuned.